we'll be talking about cloud visibility control, specifically with Zero Trust model in mind. The product that we'll be talking a little bit about today when we have this discussion is Genian ZT-NAC, and the evolution of this product and how that evolution was really driven by the requirements for cloud visibility and control in this era of cloud adoption. So first we want to talk about what was early generation network access control focused on. And if you think back to early generation network access control, there were very basic requirements. Typically you had 802.1x SNMP inline appliances that would log who, what, when, and where connected to your network. Next-gen network access control then evolved into adding additional components. So the very basic connectivity requirements of controlling access, logging information, really had to expand as the market evolved and as network access and network security requirements evolved. So ultimately, you had to have additional things like virtualization added. There was the BYOD phenomenon that came along. So to secure your network from people bringing BYOD devices in, whatever solution you chose really had to support control for those types of devices. Also, endpoint security came to the forefront. So agents were developed to provide endpoint security visibility. And as well, security automation came into play. So integration with external systems such as SIEM, IDS, IPS had to evolve into NAC products. Additionally, you had IoT, OT, which came to the forefront. Those had to be contended with. And last but not least, cloud. So cloud deployments and containerized solutions were offered. However, if you think back historically, those were in the context of just providing a cloud UI or a cloud management component to your NAC solution. The NAC solutions themselves typically always focused on an on-prem network and a corporate network. So the network boundary was wherever your physical network boundaries were in your organization, and your network access control and control to all of your critical components, which historically resided on-prem, were all integrated with your on-prem network, and those types of control mechanisms were leveraged to control access to your resources. So if we look forward, what we need to take into account is now there is much more that we need to take into consideration, especially with the adoption of cloud taking place. Now you have to be aware of what's going on in the cloud and be able to enforce policies. So all of your next generation NAC components still have to be there because you have on-prem networks. Most organizations have not 100% migrated to the cloud. There's at least some component left on-prem that needs to be contended with. So all those features that the current generation, which of course were next generation products, still need to be there as your corporate network still needs to be secured. However, above and beyond that, the evolution is to focus on zero trust. And in addition to focusing on zero trust, now we have cloud that we have to take into consideration. Because of the new cloud requirements, you have to have enhanced endpoints. And then the information on the left-hand side is outside the scope of this particular webinar, but those are additional network analysis and network response features that have been added to the ZT-NAC product of Genian's. However, we're going to focus on cloud visibility and control and those components, as well as our client component in this webinar. But as you can see, much more to contend with now than before cloud adoption. Well, why is that? So, like it or not, for the NAC vendors that are out there, cloud is here. So it's here to stay. And that is a tough proposition because many NAC solutions were designed around the entire premise of protecting an on-prem or a corporate enterprise network. So what we found here is that cloud adoption is increasing. Right now, the hesitancy we've seen for cloud adoption over the previous years is gone. Gartner predicts cloud services spending this year will total $332 billion. It's not slowing down anytime soon. Moving into next year, we're talking about an estimate of $397 billion. You're talking about multi-cloud and hybrid environments. So you may have environments where you have private data centers, private clouds, on-prem, public clouds mixed together. You may have multiple cloud service providers out there. Many organizations are not relying on only one cloud service providers. So these are not things friendly to really the previous iterations of NAC. Because many of those solutions fall short being able to address some of these challenges. So why are these challenges? Exactly what, when you peel that back a little bit, what specifically makes it hard for NAC vendors to be able to address some of those issues? Well, first of all, with the cloud adoption, the network perimeter is disappearing. Right? So network access control was really all about the network perimeter. When something connects to your network, you have to make sure that it's authorized to connect. You have to assign privileges, or you must quarantine it if it's not authorized. But with the perimeter disappearing, that's difficult. Traditional NAC enforcement was all based on that, the corporate network edge. So with the edge disappearing or moving, how do you address that? Your typical NAC enforcement mechanisms are also disappearing. So if you think about it, quarantine VLAN was one of the most widely used strategies with network access control. And when you talk about cloud environments, quarantine VLANs are simply not an option. Also, typically, having actual access to network equipment to configure ACLs and ports and all of the moving parts that were there for a typical NAC integration, that's also no longer an option. AWS controls their own network environment. You do not access AWS routers and switches. You cannot configure quarantine VLANs and use technologies like 802.1x or SNMP to manipulate network equipment. So really what that leaves is the only two control points remaining are the cloud itself and the endpoint. So whatever solution you have needs to be able to leverage the endpoint and the cloud to be able to emulate what historically was done with network access control and segmentation, etc. So those are the questions. How do you keep your existing NAC in place for your on-prem requirements, but also add in your cloud environment? How do you extend visibility and control into the cloud environment? And again, we're talking about multi-cloud service providers. So when you're looking at that, you're saying, do I have to go into, if I have multiple cloud service providers, do I have to go into each cloud service provider and try to build my own NAC or implement, reconfigure all of my historic NAC security policies into 3 different cloud service provider consoles? It's just a management nightmare. So those are some of the challenges for NAC vendors to be able to still be relevant in the era of cloud adoption. So when we look at really zero trust framework and how that real-time enforcement works, the key components here is you want to be able to manage it from anywhere. So your policy server, your UI, your database, where your policies are managed, need to be able to be hosted anywhere. So if you want to keep that on-prem, that's fine. If you want to use a vendor's cloud, Genian's cloud, for example, that is something you can do if it's offered, or you should be able to also deploy the management component in a public or private cloud of your choosing. Then you need to make sure that all of your compliance checks are made. So you have to identify the appropriate platforms, devices that are connecting to your network. In the Genian ZT-NAC case, we have device platform intelligence we use to categorize. And then you have to run everything through a policy engine. And when you run those through the policy engine and apply your zero trust policies, then you should have the option to choose the enforcement method. Now, choosing enforcement methods has always been important, and having the ability to choose and have the flexibility to choose is always a big value proposition, even for on-prem. However, as we move into the cloud, now you have to have cloud enforcement options. So that's where the connector and gateway come in that we'll talk about today. So ultimately, you need to be able to enforce your policies in any environment, on-prem, home office, or for the cloud as well. So when we talk about cloud visibility examples, what we're going to talk about here is the ability to have flexibility, again, as we talked about, to choose where you deploy your management component. Also, you're going to be choosing your cloud provider, and then you want to choose how you're going to get that visibility and control. You should be able to mix and match these. You shouldn't be locked into one particular way to manage this. You shouldn't be locked into one particular cloud service provider or locked into one way to get your cloud visibility and your control. So that is key, is to be able to have options. And that's what we're going to be explaining in some of the subsequent slides here. We're going to be talking about the various cloud visibility options. So for some people, an agentless environment may be their goal. For others, perhaps they don't want to set up security policies inside of the different cloud vendors' consoles. That's where the cloud connector comes into play. And then also the virtual sensor component is a way to get visibility by deploying a Genian sensor into any cloud environment to detect information about the nodes, IP-enabled nodes that are present in the environment. So we'll take a look at our first visibility example here. So here you pick where to deploy your policy server. In this case, we'll use the Genian's cloud as an example. Then you're going to actually enable the cloud connector inside of Genian's for your specific cloud provider. And then what happens is the connector will make the connection to the actual cloud service provider, and will report back information about all those devices, all the nodes rather, that are enabled in the cloud. So what this allows you to do is pull the visibility out of your cloud service provider's environment into your NAC environment to view it through your NAC console. This means that you'll have information about new nodes, IP-enabled nodes coming online in your cloud environment without having to separately log in to your cloud provider's console. So you may think that it sounds very complicated to configure that and to facilitate that, but in reality, it's not. So the cloud connector configuration is very simple. All you do is add a cloud provider into your Genian ZT-NAC console with the appropriate access information. You enable the collector option, and then instantly it will start to gather information about nodes, IP-enabled nodes that are enabled in that environment. So in this particular example, we're talking about an AWS environment. And in the AWS environment, once you provide the appropriate credentials, Genian ZT-NAC, regardless of where it's hosted, it could be hosted in the Genian's cloud, it could be hosted in Azure, it could be on-prem, will actually go out and pull information, detailed information, public IP, private IP, network address information, even security group information back from all of your IP-enabled, in this case, EC2 instances in the AWS environment. Another cloud visibility option is using the virtual sensor option. So again, you choose where to put your policy server. We'll go with on-prem for this example. Then you deploy your sensor. So we're switched to Azure. So now you can take a virtual sensor and deploy it into Azure. And the Genian NAC virtual sensor will detect information about the VMs in Azure and report it back to your policy server. So this allows you to actually collect information in a different cloud service provider environment. This option does not rely on a cloud connector. This option only requires that you deploy a virtual sensor in your Azure environment, and it will report information back. So this is all about options. Just like on-prem with on-prem network access control, you should have lots of different options, because you're going to have different environments. So this demonstrates a separate option to be able to get visibility out of your cloud environment and into your network access control console, regardless of what that environment is like. And the third example for visibility is going to be utilizing an agent. So for this example, we'll have our policy server hosted in AWS, because again, it's not relevant where that is. Then you're going to have a Google Compute instance that's inside of Google Cloud, and you install an agent on that instance. The agent collects information and reports it back to the policy server. So this is a third option. This option, of course, does not rely on a connector to Google Cloud. This option does not rely on you deploying a sensor into Google Cloud. This is just applying an agent onto your Google Compute instances, and then the agent will collect all that information and it will send that information back to your policy server. Again, using these different cloud service providers are for illustrative purposes only. The goal here is you should be able to mix and match this to meet your environment and your needs. So ultimately, what we end up with is a single pane of glass inside of your Genian ZT-NAC console. And inside of here, you'll be able to see information for IP-enabled nodes that are in all of your different cloud service provider environments. Now, you may not have 3 cloud service provider environments. You may only have 1. Still, the value add and the proposition is there. You get to glean information about nodes, new nodes that are coming online in your cloud environment real time in your network access control solution, which allows you then to determine what kind of policies you want to apply. Again, this is visibility you're going to get without ever having to log in to your cloud service provider console. If you do have multiple cloud service providers, it's just that much more valuable, because you're combining this information in one place for visibility about all these different nodes. Now we'll talk about how to control these nodes once we've detected them. So we're going to match a node on whatever enforcement policy. Again, your policy server could be hosted anywhere. This first example, we're going to use the cloud connector to issue a command. And in this case, we're going to shut down the instance. So for this example, we have AWS EC2s that we have previously detected through the cloud connector. Once we've detected them, we're going to match them through your enforcement policy. So now your enforcement policy is in your NAC system, not inside of your cloud service provider. So you don't have to be an AWS expert. You can leverage the familiarity of your existing NAC solution in the UI to configure a policy and enforce it. Once a violation has occurred, an unauthorized EC2, for example, that instance is automatically shut down using the CLI integration between the Genian ZT-NAC and AWS. So really the automation and the integration with cloud service providers is key at any solution you look at to help you secure cloud environments, especially if you're looking for a third-party solution outside of your cloud environments. Needs to be able to integrate and automate this kind of functionality. Example number 2, in this example, what we're going to see is, of course, we've got a node policy match that has to take place. This will be an on-prem policy server, just for an example. Then we're going to go ahead and do the connector again. And this time, instead of shutting an instance down, we're just going to modify a security group. So this is really the equivalent of being able to, if you think about historically, VLAN steering, or being able to switch to a quarantine VLAN, or being able to restrict access, or be able to facilitate segmentation, and how that was historically done on on-prem networks. What would happen is you would do a VLAN or an ACL, and that would be applied on the network equipment through technologies like Radius or SNMP. Instead, now you're actually using Cloud Connector into your cloud service provider environment, and you are actually manipulating the access that individual cloud instances have dynamically and in real time to match your policy. So this is a very powerful integration. It allows you to restrict and segment access to these EC2s. This can all be pre-configured in your Genian ZT-NAC, and you don't have to log into your AWS console. You don't have to be an expert on how to configure all the different security groups. And this is a very valuable tool to have one-stop shopping on where you can actually configure these policies, instead of configuring them in multiple places, which really is one of the biggest challenges with cloud adoption, is how do you actually control access in an automated fashion. For this control example, on the last example here, we'll talk about using the agent. So again, we're going to switch our policy server to AWS because it doesn't really matter where that resides. And we'll go back to Google Cloud as the cloud provider that we're wanting to control instances on. The agent's installed. When a policy failure occurs, the agent modifies the firewall on the Google Cloud instance in real time. So ultimately what this ends up being is the same concept where you've automated the security policy. The cloud provider is a different cloud provider because you've got Google Cloud instances you're looking to control, but you're only configuring these policies inside of one place, which is your Genian ZT-NAC UI. And then you're able to, in real time, without using any kind of a connector into Google Cloud, you're able to actually leverage the agent to quarantine or restrict access through outbound firewall rules on that Google Compute instance. So again, you're able to do this without having to set this policy inside of your Google Cloud console. So we'll talk now finally about the cloud gateway. So one of the things that we've talked about, how to control instances in the cloud, but controlling access to the cloud is different. So here you can deploy a cloud gateway in any cloud provider or in your private cloud, and you can control access to other cloud resources, the internet or HQ, for users, devices connecting from anywhere. So as these devices connect, they use a Genian ZT-NAC client that is installed as part of the NAC agent, and it establishes connections to the cloud gateway. The cloud gateway can then restrict or quarantine or fail access depending on failed authentication, failed posture, or any other type of scenario where you've configured a security policy that's been violated. So with the cloud gateway, the whole point here is once you actually have gained visibility and control of all of your IP-enabled nodes within your cloud environment, but you also want to now, from your on-prem or from remote workers or from factories or wherever, users that are trying to access resources inside of any cloud, you're able to deploy the cloud gateway, which is something that can be done through your Genian ZT-NAC console, or it can be done very easily through running a script on your cloud service provider's environment. And it basically deploys a containerized cloud gateway. That gateway acts as a gateway to anything beyond where the gateway resides. So going to a cloud resource, going to the internet, going to HQ. And again, the point of connection, where that user is not relevant. So the great thing about this is you actually choose where to deploy this. So with many solutions out there, some of this technology falls under the SASE category. You have to actually utilize wherever their endpoint or wherever their point of entry into the solution that is offered is. So geographically, you can choose from what they have deployed, but that's predetermined. You can actually deploy your own cloud gateway on the cloud service provider of your choice, in the region of your choice, location of your choice, which gives you more flexibility and more control over your environment. And that's a huge advantage for people who have mixed cloud environments, or for people who want to have more control over their solution versus getting a solution that is all pre-canned that you have to choose from, that may sometimes be more inclusive than you're actually looking for. So again, this is a great alternative to using something like a legacy firewall or VPN concentrator for remote access. And this cloud gateway is very flexible, easy to configure, and can apply your dynamic NAC policies to anybody connecting from any environment.